John dug his toes into the sand, still warm from the dying sun. The wind carried the scent of salt and grilled fish from the far-off boardwalk. His fingers clutched the hem of his oversized shirt, tugging it tighter against the breeze. A tear traced a crooked path down his dust-smudged cheek. The chatter of tourists felt like echoes from another world, one he didn't belong to. He blinked hard, trying not to cry again, but the loneliness always crept in at dusk. "Just a little nap until Mama finishes," he whispered, curling up. The sand stuck to his face, gritty and soft all at once. A faded toy car lay beside him, half buried by the tide. His belly ached with hunger, but his body was too tired to care. A long sigh escaped him, caught by the breeze like a secret. Shadows lengthened across the beach, wrapping John in dusk's chill. A distant call to prayer echoed from the mosque behind the hotels. He stirred, blinking up at a sky that had shifted to bruised purple. His lips were dry, the taste of salt and sleep clinging to them. The sand was cooler now, pressing cold against his skin. Someone laughed loudly near a fire pit far down the beach, and he flinched at the sound. His mother's last words replayed in his mind. "Stay where I can find you. Yee." A seagull hopped close, cocking its head at him before flying off. The stars began to blink awake, and still, Mama hadn't come. He pressed his forehead into the crook of his arm and closed his eyes again. John jolted awake to the sound of tires crunching sand. Bright headlights pierced the darkness, momentarily blinding him. He sat up quickly, heart hammering, unsure if he should run or stay. The engine purred smoothly, too rich and polished for anything he knew. From the shadows, he watched a tall man step out, dressed in white robes that shimmered in the lights. Two children in expensive sandals peeked out from the SUV's backseat. The man looked around and then saw John. John lowered his head, wiping his tears quickly, pretending to be asleep again. Footsteps crunched closer. "Assalamu alaikum," the man said gently. John didn't answer. He held his breath, as if stillness could make him invisible. The man knelt beside him, concern etched across his kind face. The man held out a small bottle of water, his voice calm. "Are you alone, Habi?" John hesitated before nodding, his lips trembling. "Where is your family?" the man asked, sitting beside him without touching. "Mama works in the hotel. She'll come soon," John whispered. The man's brows knit in worry as he looked toward the tall resort buildings. The scent of oud clung to his robes, deep and sweet in the cooling night. "You must be hungry," he said, handing over a wrapped date bar. John took it with a shy nod, nibbling slowly, trying not to seem desperate. The man didn't ask more questions. He simply stayed, watching the stars beside the boy. For the first time all day, John didn't feel completely alone. The man's wife stepped out of the SUV, her silk abaya whispering over the sand. She held her daughter's hand tightly, both of them watching John with soft eyes. Their son, barely older than John, whispered something that made his mother smile sadly. "He reminds me of you at that age," she murmured to her husband. John sat with his legs crossed, still nibbling, the bar half-eaten in his hand. He kept glancing toward the hotel, hoping for Mama's shadow. But the family didn't leave. They stood nearby, as if guarding him. Their kindness made John's chest ache more than his hunger ever had. His eyes filled again, not with fear this time, but something warmer, heavier. Tears slipped silently down his cheeks, and this time, he didn't wipe them away. The SUV hummed softly as it glided over the palm-lined road. John sat still, hands in his lap, unsure if he was dreaming or kidnapped. "We'll just take you to your mother. Don't worry," the man said gently. City lights danced in the windows, reflected in John's tired eyes. He'd never been inside a car like this. The seats smelled like vanilla leather. The boy beside him passed a juice box with a shy smile. John took it. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. The woman in the front seat turned around, her eyes warm. "You're safe, sweetheart." "Yee?" For the first time in days, John exhaled without shaking. His fingers slowly uncurled from the toy car in his pocket. The SUV pulled up in front of the Grand Hotel where Mama worked. John's eyes widened at the marble steps and golden lights. "This is where she works?" the man asked, impressed. John nodded. "She cleans the top floors. Nights. Yes. Die." The doorman looked surprised to see the boy step out of such a vehicle. "Wait here," the man told his family, gently taking John's hand. The touch wasn't firm or forceful, just reassuring. Together, they entered the grand lobby, where cool air and rose perfume swirled together. John's heart pounded louder than his footsteps on the marble floor. They found her in a dim hallway, mop in hand, wiping the floor with aching arms. She turned and dropped the mop. "John?" Her voice cracked, more disbelief than sound. He ran to her, face buried in her apron, sobbing into her waist. The man stepped back, giving them space. "I was waiting, like you said," John gasped between tears. "Oh, my baby. I'm so sorry," she whispered, kissing his head over and over. Tears ran down her cheeks, mixing with the dust of hours worked. She turned to the stranger. "Thank you. How did you?" He smiled kindly. "The beach told your story." "Yeah. He." In that moment, the silence between strangers felt like something holy. The hotel staff let them sit in the break room, small and filled with the scent of cardamom tea. John sat between his mother and the man's wife, sipping quietly. Their children giggled softly, showing John photos of their school. His eyes lit up at the images of books, music class, and computers. The man leaned forward. "Has he ever gone to school?" John's mother looked down. "Only for a little. It was too expensive." "Lit. That's not fair," the woman said gently. "He's so bright, I can see it." John didn't understand everything, but he knew something big was happening. He clutched his mother's hand tighter, his thumb tracing her work-worn skin. Later that night, they stood together on a hotel balcony overlooking the city. The lights of Dubai shimmered like stars fallen to earth. John leaned into his mother, her arms around him tight. The wind played with their hair, cool and soothing. "Do you think they really meant it? About school?" he asked. She kissed the top of his head. "I think they saw you, baby. Really saw you." "Yen. Isen." He looked up at her, smiling through the last of his tears. Maybe everything will be different now," he whispered. "Yes," she said, voice steady despite the quake in her heart. "Different and better." John stood in front of the grand school gate, his new backpack heavy on his shoulders. The sun rose behind the building, casting hopeful streaks of light across his face. He glanced back at his mother, who gave him a brave thumbs up. The man from the beach stood beside her, nodding with calm encouragement. John's hands trembled slightly as he stepped inside the gate. He had never seen a place so clean, so green, so full of color. Children laughed, backpacks bouncing, uniforms crisp. John smiled nervously when a boy waved at him near the entrance. Somewhere deep inside, something warm bloomed. The classroom smelled like fresh paper and pencil shavings. John found his seat, heart thumping louder than the clock on the wall. His name was already written on a name tag. He stared at it in disbelief. The teacher, a kind woman with silver-rimmed glasses, greeted him warmly. He introduced himself shyly, cheeks red, voice barely audible. Some kids smiled at him. Others simply nodded politely. When class began, John's eyes widened with every page turned. He soaked up every word like rain on a thirsty field. For the first time in his life, he didn't want the day to end. During recess, John sat under a tree, munching on his sandwich quietly. Two boys from his class plopped beside him, one with a soccer ball. "Wanna play with us next break?" one asked casually. John blinked. "Me? Yeah, why not? You look fast," the other said, grinning. His lips curled into a smile, small but genuine. He nodded, cheeks glowing with something new, acceptance. The boys chatted about a school trip, and John listened like he was hearing music. Laughter bubbled from him before he even realized it. For once, he wasn't the outsider. Their new apartment wasn't big, but it was warm, safe, and clean. John sat at the small table, reading aloud from a book the family had gifted him. His mother stirred a pot on the stove, humming softly. The smell of lentils and garlic filled the room, grounding him in comfort. "You sound like a real student," she teased. He grinned. "Because I am one now, right? You always were. Just needed the chance," she said, her eyes misty. John went back to reading, voice clear and confident. The night outside was dark, but their little home glowed with quiet joy. John lay in bed, blanket up to his chin, eyes fixed on the stars through the window. He whispered to the moon, as if it could hear him, "Thank you, Yunia." The silence of the room was peaceful, not lonely. He thought of the beach, the sand, the long wait. And the moment everything changed, his chest rose and fell slowly, contentedly. He imagined his future, not as a blurry dream, but a real, reachable place. A place with books, games, friendships, and light. Tears came again, but this time, they were soft and sweet. "I'm not just surviving anymore," he whispered. "I'm living." The applause echoed through the school auditorium like waves against the shore. John walked up the steps slowly, gripping the railing with shaking hands. His name had been called for excellence in reading and kindness. Spotlights made the room blur, or maybe that was the tears in his eyes. He reached the stage and accepted the certificate with both hands. His teacher smiled wide. "You've come so far, John." G'day. He looked into the crowd and found his mother wiping her cheeks. The Arab family sat beside her, clapping proudly. John bowed his head, heart pounding with something fierce and beautiful. Belonging. The little cafe smelled of mint tea and sweet pastries. John sat in a corner, flipping pages of a thick book with wonder in his eyes. At the next table, his mother spoke with the wealthy couple. They laughed, reminiscing about the night on the beach. "We only meant to help a little," the man said. "But he helped us too." His mother nodded, emotion in her voice. "He teaches me every day." Yai. They clinked tea glasses in a quiet toast to change, to fate, to compassion. John looked up, and all three adults smiled at him together, his new, extended family. In that cafe, they built a future, not with bricks, but with love. The library buzzed with little voices and the soft rustle of pages. John sat cross-legged on the rug, reading aloud to younger kids from his school. His voice changed for each character, making them giggle and gasp. A teacher watched from afar, smiling at how far he'd come. Every page he turned was another step away from the beach. One girl leaned against him, comforted by his voice. Another boy whispered, "I want to read like you someday." "Yeah." John smiled. "You will. Just wait." Bound. In that room full of books, he wasn't just a student. He was a guide, a spark. They sat on the same beach where it all began. The sun dipped low, painting the waves in orange and rose. "Remember this spot?" his mother asked. John nodded, eyes on the water. "It feels different now." "You when Mama died." She reached out, brushing sand from his shoulder. "Because you're different." "No." He smiled. "No, because everything's possible now." "New." The sound of the tide wasn't lonely anymore. It was music. They didn't need to say more. The moment held them like a promise. From that very place of waiting, they now dreamed forward. The sun rose behind him as he walked toward the school gate. His steps were steady, full of purpose. Children waved as he passed. Some older, some younger, all familiar. He had a new book under his arm and a dream in his heart. From hotel backrooms to classrooms, from sand to sunrise, he had crossed worlds. He thought of his mother, her hands still working, still strong. He thought of the family who stopped and stayed when others walked by. And most of all, he thought of the boy who once cried into the sand. That boy was still in him, but now he was standing tall. "Let's begin," he whispered to the morning, and stepped into his future.